My message this morning is, we're not alone in the boat. In our message this morning, Jesus and the disciples are hit with a storm. And no doubt, when they got into the boat, after a long day of Jesus preaching to the crowds, the surface of the water was glassy and the sky was not dark. Jesus, exhausted, went to the rear of the boat and he fell asleep on a pillow. But then a gale-force winds arose and waves crashed against the boat and the water started to spill into the boat. It looked like they were going to sink for sure. Understandably, the disciples panicked and they rushed to Jesus and they were shocked and perhaps a bit angry that he was sleeping through all of this. "Teacher," they cried, "don't you care that we are drowning?" We too are dealing with all kinds of storms. On a Wednesday evening, Dial and Ruth, 21, Lexington, South Carolina, walked into the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. There was a peaceful Bible study taking place. After an hour of setting in on the Bible study, witnesses say that the young man stood up and said, "I'm here to shoot black people." He killed 9 human beings with a handgun. Upon hearing about this, many of us might have wondered, "Oh God, how could you allow this to happen? Why didn't you stop it? Don't you care?" And due to the brutality of the ISIS, sources say that there are more refugees in the world today than at any time since World War II. Just when we thought the waters were calming between Russia and the United States, talk of war and the arms race appears to have begun again. We might ask, "Dear God, don't you care that we are drowning?" In our personal lives, we may find that those people and things we've always relied on for security, they're being swept away. A parent loses his or her mental faculties. A loved one goes to the doctor and is told that they have cancer. Someone in our family loses their job. A close friend is killed in a car accident. A spouse dies of a heart attack. A family member goes to prison. When these things are happening, it can feel as if everything is falling apart beneath us. We might wonder, is God asleep? Doesn't He care that we're drowning? Each of us knows from one experience or another what it's like to be caught in a storm, to feel alone, and like the disciples, to be afraid. We fear rejection, disapproval, failure, meaninglessness, illness, and of course we fear death, our own death. The death of those we love and the death of people we don't know in foreign wars that are dying. My nephew recently lost his mother, my sister. That day I asked my nephew, how is he feeling? How is he feeling? His answer, "I feel alone. I feel alone." And in this story, Jesus challenges the disciples and Jesus challenges us to turn to Him, the Lord of the winds and the waves, and trust that He is not only more powerful than the storms that rage around us all the time, but also that we are not in that boat alone. We're not alone. Jesus goes through the storms with us. You know, we might look at this message this morning. It's important to note that Jesus never says there's nothing to be afraid of. He never tells us there's nothing to be afraid of. Time and time again we read these words in the Bible. Do not be afraid. They are, you might say, the first and last words in the Gospels. They are the first words that the angels say to the terrified shepherds when Jesus is born. They are the first words spoken to the woman at Jesus' tomb when they find it empty. And they are the first words that are spoken by the risen Christ to the disciples hiding in the upper room. Do not be afraid. Not because there are no dangers and terrible things in this world. Do not be afraid because God is with us all the time. God is with us. He never leaves us. The winds and the waves were real and a dangerous threat. Rather, Jesus asked, why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet? Imagine this, and I'm sure you've all seen it. A child wakes up in the middle of a night, terrified by some dream, scared of some monster that lives under the bed. A mother rushes to the child's room and whispers gently, shh, there's nothing to be afraid of. But as comforting as these words are, is there really nothing to be afraid of? Certainly, there's no monster under the bed, child's bed, but there are plenty of other things in the world that are lurking. Saying there's nothing to be afraid of is very different from saying don't be afraid. Because the hard truth of the matter is that scary things are very real. Isolation, pain, illness, rejection, meaninglessness, losing one's job, failure, bigotry, hatred, murder, you name it. It's all there. But as we grow in our faith, we come to understand that even though such horrible, fearsome things are very real, they don't have the final word. They don't have the final word. They don't have ultimate power over us because God is mightier than they are. God is mightier. Instead of saying, there's nothing to be afraid of, the whole truth for the mother confronting that scared child is to say, don't be afraid because you are not alone. You are not alone. Sadly, too many of us think we are indeed alone. And so we fear. We freak out. And fear is what ruins our lives. What is at the heart of bigotry and not moving forward in love? It's fear. Fear is what does it. What robs us of the ability to enjoy life? Fear. What causes us to turn in on ourselves and become defensive, even violent? Fear. 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 Why do rich people hoard their wealth? Fear. Fear of losing it. Fear causes people to do crazy things. And as you know, back when that Titanic sank, many of the lifeboats that were lowered into the icy water, they were only half full. Survivors were told, in a book that I read, were told of swimmers who were unable to make his way to one of the half-empty, he made his way to one of the half-empty lifeboats. He clutched on the side and tried to climb in, but no one would help him to get in. And as a matter of fact, one of the women took an oar and pounded his hands until he couldn't hold on any longer and he slipped back into the sea. She did it not because there wasn't any room in the boat. She done it out of fear. She was brutalized by fear. Fear can cause us to do things that we would never dream of doing if we felt secure. Fear is the impetus behind bullying, name-calling, fights, and wars. In 1 John, we are told God is love. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. The person who is afraid had not been made perfect in love. The disciples cried out in the boat, "Teacher, don't you care that we are drowning?" Jesus got up and gave orders to the wind, and he said to the lake, "Silence, be still." The wind settled down, and there was a great calm. Jesus asked them, "Why were you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?" Now, faith doesn't mean that we have no problems, that there will no longer be threats, dangers, or perils, and so forth. A woman tells about flying in a plane that started to have engine trouble. When the pilot made the announcement they were going to try and make an emergency landing, the woman took her husband's hand and they offered up a simple prayer of faith. They prayed, "The light of God, may it surround us. The love of God unfolds us. The power of God protect us. And the presence of God watches over us. Whenever we are, wherever we are, God is." The woman said that they knew that this prayer would not stop the plane from crashing if that was what was going to happen. But instead, it was a declaration of their confidence that living or dying was with them. They were in God's care. They're in God's care. That is peace. That is comfort. That's comfort. That's strength. That is faith. When we cry out in distress, we often find that we aren't delivered from the situation, but instead we are given the grace to endure and be victorious no matter what happens. Just think of Jesus in prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. He asked to be spared from the agony of the cross, but he wasn't spared. Instead, he was strengthened to go through it. When the storm hit the boat in Mark chapter 4, Jesus wasn't reminding the disciples that whether their lives were spared or not, they would not fall out of the palm of God's hand. That he would always have them in the palm of their hands. Did you know that God is right here in the boat with you, just as Jesus was with the disciples? Even though there are fearsome and horrible things in this life, they need not paralyze us. They need not paralyze you and me. They need not cause us to stop loving God and neighbor. They need not to have dominion over us. They need not own us. They don't have to own us, because through faith in God, who raised Jesus from the dead, we know that we are never alone in that boat. We're never alone. Jesus is always with you and me. He's always there. And that is all that really matters. That's all that really matters. Amen.
Amen. Amen.